Sterling Enterprises stood tall in the heart of the city, its glass walls reflecting the skyline like a kingdom built on ambition. The lobby was a space of hushed conversations, polished floors, and an unspoken understanding. Only the powerful mattered here. A few steps through its golden doors and the divide became clear. Senior executives glided through the halls in custom-tailored suits, their conversations filled with stock values, international investments, and weekend golf retreats. The higher you were, the louder your presence. At the other end of the spectrum were the forgotten faces, the interns running errands, the receptionists answering calls with practiced politeness, and the janitors who worked unnoticed until something needed to be cleaned. They blended into the background, as if their presence only mattered when the powerful required their services. At the top of this hierarchy, James Whitmore, vice president of operations, sipped his imported espresso, watching the floor below from his office. His smirk was subtle as he turned to his assistant. "Another new batch of interns today," he mused. "Let's see if any of them actually have potential, or if we're just filling diversity quotas again." His assistant nodded without a word. At Sterling Enterprises, bias wasn't spoken aloud, but it was understood. Every morning, the garage filled with luxury cars, Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, and Ferraris parked in pristine spaces reserved for executives. It wasn't just about transportation. It was a symbol of where you stood in the company's hierarchy. Employees who walked in from the subway or took the bus never spoke of it. They knew better than to mention their commutes in front of their superiors, who boasted about their latest vacations in the Hamptons. At the elevator, two junior analysts stepped aside as James Whitmore strode in, his Rolex glinting under the fluorescent lights. He didn't acknowledge them. He never did. A few feet away, Samantha Rivera, a junior analyst, fresh out of business school, watched the interaction. She had seen it happen every day, executives speaking only to their equals, treating everyone else like part of the furniture. One of her colleagues leaned in. "You'll get used to it," he whispered. "Just make sure you wear the right brand, drive the right car, and laugh at their jokes. That's how you move up here." Samantha forced a smile, but deep down, she wondered if talent meant anything in this company. A boardroom meeting was in session. Leather chairs, crystal water glasses, and a long mahogany table where power was concentrated. Nathan Sterling's name was displayed in gold on the far wall, but he was never discussed in these meetings. He was a legend, sure, but to the executives, he was just a distant figure, a name, not a presence. Whitmore adjusted his tie and leaned back in his chair, speaking to the room. "Let's be realistic. We hire for prestige. We're not here to build anyone's self-esteem. We're here to maintain standards." Murmurs of agreement rippled across the table. No one questioned the unspoken rule. The higher your pedigree, the further you could go. Outside the boardroom, an intern rushed past, nearly bumping into a senior consultant. The consultant scowled. "Watch where you're going," he snapped. "And remember, you're here to observe, not be noticed." The intern muttered an apology and scurried away. In this company, some voices carried weight. Others were merely background noise. Down in the employee cafeteria, a quiet ritual took place every day. Executives dined in the private lounge. White tablecloths, gourmet meals, wine poured into crystal glasses. Laughter flowed easily. Conversations about vacations and exclusive clubs filled the air. A few floors below, the employees who served them ate reheated meals from home. Samantha watched from the corner of the room, gripping her plastic fork. No rules stated they couldn't sit in the executive lounge, yet none of them ever tried. She turned to an older employee, a woman who had been at the company for years. "Has anyone ever eaten up there?" The woman chuckled under her breath. "Sweetheart, you can't sit where you're not invited." Samantha's chest tightened. She had worked hard to get here. But was that ever going to be enough? At the far end of the building, a janitor quietly wiped down the marble floors. He moved efficiently, unnoticed, the same way he had for years. Employees rushed past him, never sparing him a glance. One executive knocked over his coffee on the way out. Without pausing, he muttered, "Get that cleaned up." The janitor bent down, his fingers curling around the rag. He had worked here longer than most of the executives, but in their eyes, he was just part of the scenery. Samantha noticed. Her jaw clenched as she watched the exchange. It wasn't just about wealth, it was about who mattered. During a performance review, a young black analyst named Marcus sat across from a senior manager. The manager offered a polite smile but barely glanced at his report. "Your work is good," he said, flipping through the pages as lazily, "but I think you need more confidence. You're a little too soft-spoken." Marcus knew what that meant. He had watched louder, less competent men get praised for their leadership. "I understand," he said evenly, though his chest burned. "I'll work on that." As he walked out of the office, he heard laughter from the senior manager's lounge. "You can always tell which hires are diversity picks," one voice murmured. "They try so hard to prove themselves." Marcus clenched his fists but kept walking. He had no choice. Behind closed doors, in hushed conversations, the real rules of Sterling Enterprises were spoken. We don't say it out loud, but you know how it is. Hiring policies are one thing, but let's be honest. Certain people just don't fit in. It's not about race, it's about culture. Excuses disguised as logic. Bias hidden behind polished words. It wasn't official policy, but it was law in every way that mattered. Nathan Sterling had built this company from nothing. And yet, if he walked through these halls today, as the man he was before his wealth, he knew exactly how they would treat him. He was about to find out. Nathan Sterling sat alone in his study, staring at the framed newspaper article on the wall. It was from years ago, a front-page story about a self-made billionaire who had defied all odds. The headline read, "Nathan Sterling from Poverty to Power." His fingers traced over the glass, but instead of pride, a deep unease settled in his chest. A recent report sat open on his desk, a workplace analysis filled with the complaints of discrimination, elitism, and unethical hiring practices. Employees who didn't fit the image of Sterling Enterprises found themselves overlooked, dismissed, or outright ignored. Nathan closed his eyes. This was not the company he had built. He walked to the window, overlooking the towering skyscraper that bore his name, his empire. But what did it stand for now? His assistant, Richard, entered cautiously. "Sir, the executives are asking if you'll be attending the quarterly meeting." Nathan exhaled slowly. "No, not yet." Richard hesitated. "Is something wrong?" Nathan turned to face him, his eyes sharp but unreadable. "Tell them I'm taking a leave of absence." Richard raised an eyebrow. "For how long?" Nathan didn't answer. Instead, he picked up the employee report once more. Wealth had never defined him. Not then, not now. He had been a poor kid once, standing outside corporate buildings just like this one, watching men in suits walk past him like he didn't exist. Back then, he had told himself, "One day I'll walk through those doors and they'll know my name." Now he feared the people inside wouldn't just dismiss the boy he used to be. They would step right over him. If Sterling Enterprises had lost its way, it was because he had been too far removed to see it. There was only one way to know the truth. Nathan opened his closet and ran his hands over the rows of suits, each one tailored to perfection. He moved past them and reached for a box tucked away in the corner. Inside were old clothes he hadn't worn in years. A faded hoodie, worn-out jeans, a pair of scuffed sneakers. He looked at himself in the mirror, adjusting a baseball cap over his graying hair. Gone was the billionaire. Now he was just another worker. His phone buzzed with a message from one of his executives. "Looking forward to the meeting, sir. We've got great numbers this quarter." Nathan typed back a single reply. "I'll be watching." Walking into his company as an outsider felt surreal. For years, his name had carried weight in these halls. People stood taller when he walked by. Voices dropped to whispers. Meetings paused. Now, not a single head turned. At the front desk, the receptionist barely glanced at him before returning to her computer. Nathan waited. When she didn't acknowledge him, he cleared his throat. "Excuse me, She cut him off with a sigh. "If you're here for janitorial work, maintenance checks in at the side entrance." Nathan studied her face. She hadn't even looked at him properly. He nodded slowly and turned away, his chest tightening. So this was how it began. He walked through the halls, noting everything. Executives in tailored suits barely noticed the employees who walked past them in cheap dress shirts and department store shoes. A young black intern carried a stack of folders, stepping aside to let a group of senior managers pass. None of them acknowledged him. An older janitor mopped a spill near the break room. As he moved aside, a woman in a designer blazer muttered under her breath, "Try not to be in the way." Nathan clenched his jaw. He reached the staff lounge, where lower-level employees took hurried lunches at plain plastic tables. Upstairs, he knew the executives dined in private lounges with fresh-cut steak and imported wine. For the first time in decades, Nathan was invisible in a place where his name commanded power. And maybe that was exactly what he needed. Nathan stepped through the grand glass doors of Sterling Enterprises, his presence unnoticed by the very people who once hung on his every word. Dressed in faded jeans, a worn-out hoodie, and an old baseball cap, he had never felt more out of place in a building that bore his name. Employees strode past him, their designer heels clicking against the polished marble floors. Their conversations carried an air of exclusivity, talks of private clubs, investment portfolios, and weekend getaways to exotic locations. No one greeted him. No one even looked his way. The weight of 100 indifferent stares settled on his shoulders as if he were nothing more than a shadow passing through. He clenched his fists. He had built this empire, yet today he was nothing in its eyes. He approached the reception desk where Madison, the front desk assistant, sat typing away on her keyboard. Blonde, polished, and always the first face visitors saw, she carried herself with an air of detached superiority. Nathan cleared his throat. "Excuse me, miss." Without looking up, she sighed. "If you're looking for maintenance, the service entrance is in the back." His lips pressed into a firm line. "Actually, I—" She finally glanced at him, eyes sweeping over his clothes before narrowing. Her gaze carried the weight of a silent verdict. Unimportant. Not worth her time. With a dismissive wave, she pointed toward the far end of the lobby. "Like I said, maintenance and janitorial check in at the back. This is the corporate entrance." Nathan inhaled sharply. There was no malice in her tone, just routine indifference. She had done this before, countless times. He wanted to push back, to ask if she even knew who he was. But this wasn't the time. This was exactly what he needed to see. A burst of laughter echoed across the room. A small group of well-dressed executives had gathered near the elevator, their suits pristine, their watches gleaming. One of them, a young man in an expensive navy suit, leaned toward the others, muttering something under his breath. Nathan caught the words as they exchanged smirks. "Probably looking for a janitor job. Should have used the back entrance." Another chuckled. "Bet he thought he could walk in here and get a position just like that." Their amusement was easy, effortless, the kind that came from years of knowing they belonged in places like this, while others didn't. Nathan's jaw tightened. They didn't see him as a man. They saw him as a walking stereotype. A young woman approached the front desk, setting down a stack of files. Samantha Rivera, a junior analyst, had been with the company for only a year. She noticed Nathan standing there, ignored, and hesitated for just a second. Nathan saw it, the conflict in her eyes, the brief flicker of conscience. But just as quickly, she lowered her gaze and moved on, blending back into the crowd. Nathan sighed. He wasn't angry. He understood. To speak up was to risk standing out. And in this company, standing out could cost you everything. He turned on his heel, heading for the exit. No one stopped him. No one cared. But as he walked out the doors, something inside him shifted. They had no idea who he was. But soon, they would. Nathan stepped through the doors of Sterling Enterprises, a place he had built from the ground up. But today, he was just another face in the crowd, dressed in faded jeans, an old hoodie, and a cap pulled low over his graying hair. The air inside was thick with polished professionalism. Sharp suits, designer heels, and confident strides filled the space. Conversations hummed with corporate buzzwords, investment strategies, and weekend trips to private resorts. Not a single person looked at him. He took a slow breath, scanning the room. How easy it was to become invisible. He moved toward the front desk, where Madison, the receptionist, typed away on her computer. Her long, manicured nails tapped against the keyboard, her eyes fixed on the screen. Nathan cleared his throat. "Excuse me, ma'am." Without looking up, she sighed. "If you're looking for maintenance, check in at the service entrance." Nathan hesitated. "Actually, She glanced up, barely sparing him a second of her time. Her expression flickered with mild irritation, then dismissal. "Sir, I don't have time for this. If you need assistance, go around back." Her tone wasn't cruel, just routine indifference, as if dealing with someone like him was beneath her. Nathan felt the familiar pang of recognition. How many times had people dismissed him just like this when he was young? He forced a polite smile. "I just wanted to ask." Madison let out a sigh, waved her hand in the air, and turned back to her screen. "Not my problem." Next. The conversation was over before it had even begun. A few feet away, a group of executives stood near the elevators, their suits crisp, their laughter effortless. One of them, a young man in a navy blazer, glanced at Nathan and smirked. "Looks like someone got lost." Another chuckled, adjusting his gold watch. "Or maybe he's here for janitorial work. Used the wrong entrance, though." A third executive snickered. "I swear they'll let anyone walk in these days." Their amusement was easy, casual. They didn't see him as a person, just a background figure, someone unimportant. Nathan felt his jaw tighten. They had no idea who they were mocking. He remained still, watching, absorbing. A young woman hurried past him, clutching a folder. Samantha Rivera, a junior analyst, glanced at him briefly, her eyes filled with hesitation. Nathan saw it, the flicker of guilt, the recognition that something wasn't right. But she said nothing. Just like the others, she kept walking. Nathan exhaled slowly. He didn't blame her. In a place like this, to acknowledge the mistreatment of others was to risk becoming the next target. He turned toward the exit. No one stopped him. No one cared. But as he stepped outside, a slow, determined fire burned in his chest. This was his company, his legacy. And if they had forgotten who he was about to remind them. Nathan moved through the hallways of Sterling Enterprises, his company, yet in this moment, he was nothing more than a shadow. No nods of recognition, no acknowledgments. The walls were lined with framed photos of past victories, mergers, acquisitions, partnerships that had propelled the company to greatness. His name was on every plaque, every milestone. And yet, today, he was invisible. Near the break room, a group of executives stood in a circle, their laughter filling the space. Nathan recognized every face. James Whitmore, the VP of Operations, stood at the center, speaking with the easy arrogance of a man who had never known struggle. Nathan approached, pausing just a few steps away. James barely spared him a glance before smirking. "Lost, old man? This isn't a charity." A chuckle rippled through the group. Nathan studied James, his expensive watch, his tailored suit, the air of entitlement he wore like a second skin. James sighed dramatically, looking Nathan up and down. "If you're looking for work, I'd try the janitorial department." A burst of laughter followed. Another executive, a man in a gray suit, smirked. "Actually, we do need someone to clean up after us. Maybe you should apply." Nathan's fingers curled into his palms, but his face remained neutral. This was exactly what he needed to see. A younger executive, Daniel Hart, shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't laughing, but he also wasn't speaking. Nathan caught the hesitation in his eyes. Would he say something? Would anyone? James shook his head. "I swear, the security in this place is getting lazy. Anyone can just walk in these days." Another executive laughed. "Should we call security? Wouldn't want the old guy loitering around." Nathan turned his gaze to the group, scanning each face, waiting. No one spoke. Not Daniel. Not the others. Silence. Complicity. James smirked. "Come on, fellas. Let's not waste time. We've got real business to discuss." The group turned, walking away without another word. Nathan exhaled slowly. This was his company, and in his absence it had become everything he despised. He had wanted to see the truth. Now he had, and soon so would they. Nathan stood still, absorbing the quiet hostility that filled the air around him. The sea of expensive suits and calculated indifference stretched before him. No one spoke to him. No one looked at him except to judge. His presence was an offense, a stain on their pristine world of exclusivity. A few whispered, their voices just loud enough for him to hear. Why is he still standing there? Security should really do a better job screening who comes in. A sharp laugh rang from the back of the group. Maybe he thinks if he stands here long enough, someone will offer him a real job. Nathan clenched his fists, exhaling through his nose. He had spent decades building this company, and yet here he was, unwanted. As he turned to leave, a voice cut through the silence. "Excuse me, sir. Do you need help?" The murmurs ceased. A ripple of tension spread across the room. Nathan turned. A young woman stood near the coffee station, her eyes hesitant but kind. Samantha Rivera, a junior analyst, a nobody in their world. Her colleagues stiffened. Some shot her warning glances. She hesitated. Nathan saw it, the battle playing out in her mind. To help him was to go against the unspoken rules of Sterling Enterprises. She took a breath, then walked toward him. I noticed you were waiting," she said, voice quieter now, as if realizing too late what she had done. "Do you need directions?" The weight of the room bore down on her. James Whitmore folded his arms, watching with a smirk. Another executive, a tall woman in a navy blazer, scoffed. "Really, Samantha? You think he belongs here?" Samantha's fingers tightened around the file she held. Nathan studied her, seeing the guilt in her eyes. She wasn't just speaking to him, she was speaking against them. He nodded. "Thank you, Miss—" She swallowed. "Rivera. Samantha Rivera." He smiled slightly. "It's rare to find someone willing to be decent in a place like this." She glanced around, sensing the growing disapproval. A few executives were already turning away, as if she'd embarrassed herself. Nathan let the moment settle. He had been waiting for someone, anyone, to prove that decency still existed here. And it wasn't from the powerful, not the executives, not the ones who flaunted their wealth. It was the ones who knew struggle, the ones who still remembered what it meant to be overlooked. Nathan gave her one last nod before stepping away. Samantha hesitated, then quickly returned to her desk. The moment was over. The room exhaled, returning to its usual elitism. But the damage was done. Nathan had seen all he needed. This company was no longer his. But soon it would be again. Nathan paced back and forth in his penthouse, the city skyline stretching endlessly before him. Lights flickered in the distance, but his thoughts were trapped in the events of the day. The humiliation, the dismissiveness, the laughter, his own employees, people who claimed to uphold the values of Sterling Enterprises, had looked at him as if he were beneath them. He ran a hand over his face, frustration mounting. This was his company, his legacy, and yet, had he really built a business where appearance meant more than integrity? He sank into a leather chair, eyes locked on the golden Sterling Enterprises logo embossed on a nearby plaque. Once, it had been a symbol of triumph. Now, it felt like a lie. His company had become everything he had once fought against. His father's words echoed in his mind. Never let them make you feel invisible. But today, that's exactly what had happened. Memories surfaced, his younger years, the struggles, the doors slammed in his face. He had walked into boardrooms as a nobody, his ideas dismissed before they were even heard. He had to be twice as smart, twice as prepared, and still the world had treated him as if he were nothing, until he made them see him, until he forced them to listen. But now it was his own company making people feel like they didn't belong. His grip tightened on the armrests. This wasn't just arrogance. This was systemic. They didn't just mistreat him, they mistreated anyone they deemed lesser. His executives had laughed, mocked, judged without a second thought. Not one of them had questioned it, except her, Samantha, the only one who had seen him, the only one who had dared to acknowledge him when everyone else looked the other way. It hadn't been much, a polite nod, an offer of help, but in that moment it had meant everything, because it proved one thing: there was still hope. Someone in that building had remembered that kindness mattered. But kindness alone wasn't enough. This had gone too far. He had two choices: turn a blind eye, let the culture continue to fester, or step in and tear it down, brick by brick. The choice wasn't hard. They wanted to judge people based on appearances? Fine. Tomorrow they would see him for exactly who he was. The reckoning was coming. And this time he wouldn't be ignored. The office bustled with the usual morning energy, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, hushed conversations near the coffee machine. No one suspected what was coming. Then an email notification popped up on every screen. Subject: mandatory company meeting, 9 a.m. sharp. All employees required to attend. James Whitmore barely glanced at it before rolling his eyes. Probably another useless pep talk about diversity or team culture. Waste of time. Madison leaned against the reception desk, flipping through her planner. Bet it's just another department restructuring. Maybe even a round of layoffs. They wouldn't dare touch me, though. Across the office, quiet murmurs filled the air. Executives, managers, interns, all whispering their own theories. A merger? A leadership shakeup? A major client loss? By 8:55 a.m., the conference room overflowed. Some stood in the back, others lounged in leather chairs exchanging nervous glances. Then the doors at the front opened. A man entered, tall, confident, sharply dressed in a tailored navy blue suit. His presence commanded the room without a word. James smirked, nudging at his colleague. Finally, some answers. Then he looked again, and the color drained from his face. Madison's grip on her notepad tightened. The polished man standing at the front. They had seen him before, but not like this. Yesterday, he was nobody. A janitor, a nuisance, someone beneath them. Today, he stood before them like a king reclaiming his throne. A cold, creeping dread settled over the room. Every cruel laugh, every dismissive sneer, every insult whispered in the halls. They hadn't mocked a nobody. They had mocked Nathan Sterling, the man whose name was stamped on every paycheck. Silence stretched, suffocating, as Nathan took his time looking at each face. He saw fear in their eyes, the weight of realization sinking in. Still, he didn't speak. He let the silence work. The arrogance that once filled the room fractured. James fidgeted, tugging at his tie. Madison's usual smirk was nowhere to be found. Nathan let them sweat. Then finally he spoke, his voice calm, controlled, dangerous. "Tell me," he paused, glancing around, "how do we treat people in this company?" The question cut through the room like a blade. Nobody answered, because they already knew, and for the first time they knew there would be consequences. A thick silence filled the conference room. The weight of a reckoning pressed down on every uneasy face. Executives, managers, employees, all waiting for someone else to speak first. No one dared. Nathan's steely gaze moved slowly across the room, meeting each pair of eyes that had mocked him the day before. He saw their discomfort, their nervous shuffling, the way their confidence cracked beneath the realization of who he really was. No smug smiles now, no dismissive glances, just fear. Nathan clasped his hands together, speaking in a voice so controlled, so deliberate, that it sent chills through the room. Yesterday was enlightening. The silence deepened. I came into this company, my company, in the simplest form. No title, no wealth, no power attached to my name. I was just another face. And in that moment, I saw exactly who you really are. He let the words hang, his eyes scanning the room. I watched how you treated someone you thought was beneath you, how you sneered, how you whispered, how you dismissed a man with nothing more than a shake of the hand. He turned his gaze to James Whitmore. James swallowed hard. I was humiliated in my own building, spoken to like I was a nobody, simply because I didn't look the part. Nathan's voice never rose, but the tension in the room did. So tell me, when you walked in today, polished, dressed in your expensive suits, stepping over people you don't even acknowledge, did you feel secure in your positions, in your power? The employees shifted in their seats. No one answered. Nathan didn't need them to. He glanced at a folder on the table in front of him, flipping it open with a deliberate slowness. James Whitmore. James flinched. His face, once arrogant, was now pale. Nathan met his gaze. You are no longer employed at Sterling Enterprises. Gasps rippled through the room. James jolted forward, his voice cracking. Nathan, wait. Mr. Sterling. The correction landed like a slap. Nathan didn't blink. Effective immediately, you are to vacate the premises. Security will escort you out. Two uniformed guards stepped forward. James shot out of his chair. This is a mistake. I've worked here for years. You can't. Nathan raised a hand, cutting him off with nothing more than a glance. You don't get to dictate what I can and cannot do in a company I built from nothing. James's mouth snapped shut. Nathan's gaze drifted to the receptionist. Madison. The notepad trembled in Madison's hands. You laughed in my face, refused to acknowledge my presence, spoke to me as if I were a burden, not a human being. Nathan leaned forward slightly. And I don't believe in employing people who lack basic decency. Madison's breath hitched. You're fired. Her eyes welled with tears, but Nathan had already looked away. More names followed. One by one, those who had mocked him, who had joined in the sneering, who had remained silent in their complicity, each one was named. Each one was dismissed. Security stood ready. The fired employees had no choice but to stand, to gather their things, to take the longest walk of their lives out of the room. James clenched his fists. You'll regret this. Nathan tilted his head. For the first time, he let his voice grow sharp. The only thing I regret is allowing this toxic culture to fester under my watch. James hesitated for a second longer before storming toward the door, his career at Sterling Enterprises officially over. The remaining employees sat frozen. Nathan took a slow breath. Then his final words sealed the moment. This company will no longer be a place where wealth determines worth. If that makes you uncomfortable, there's the door. And no one moved. Nathan looked around the conference room, his gaze settling on the employees who remained. The tension from the termination still lingered, but now there was something else in the air. Expectation. He took a slow breath before speaking, his tone firm yet calm. Now that we've removed the problem, it's time to recognize the solution. The room shifted, whispers floating in the air. Nathan clasped his hands together. For too long, this company has valued the wrong things. Titles, power, appearances. But that ends today. He let the silence stretch, making sure his words sank in. Real leadership isn't about where you come from. It's not about what you wear. It's about how you treat people. And some of you, he scanned the room, understand that better than others. A pause, then he called a name. Samantha Rivera. The entire room turned. Samantha stiffened in her seat, her eyes wide. Her heart pounded as whispers rippled through the crowd. Nathan gestured toward her. Please, stand up. Slowly, shakily, she rose to her feet. She was used to being overlooked, blending into the background. Now all eyes were on her. Nathan continued, his voice filled with something that hadn't been present moments ago. Pride. Yesterday, when everyone else chose to ignore me, you made a different choice. Samantha swallowed hard, her hands gripping the edge of the table. You treated me with basic human decency when it was easier to stay silent. You saw a stranger being mistreated and chose to act. Nathan held her gaze. That is what leadership looks like. A murmur swept through the crowd. People exchanged glances, some in admiration, others in shock. Nathan let his next words fall with weight. Samantha, you are no longer a junior analyst. Gasps, Samantha's breath hitched. Effective immediately, you are now part of senior management. Silence. Then a slow wave of applause began. Hesitant at first, then stronger. Tears welled in Samantha's eyes. Mr. Sterling, I don't know what to say. Nathan gave her a small, reassuring nod. See nothing. Just keep being exactly who you are. She blinked rapidly, overwhelmed, as the applause grew louder. For the first time in her career, she wasn't just seen, she was valued. Nathan turned back to the employees. This is what the future of Sterling Enterprises looks like. Promotions based on character, not connections. A culture built on respect, not elitism. The applause continued, but Nathan wasn't done. We're implementing real change, a system that rewards hard work, integrity, and inclusivity, because diversity, fairness, and respect are no longer just corporate buzzwords in this company. Their policy. He let the words settle before delivering his final message. If you don't believe in these values, you're free to leave. But if you stay, understand this. Wealth will no longer determine worth in this company. Your actions will. The room was silent, then one by one people nodded, some in agreement, some in understanding, some in quiet realization. And just like that, Sterling Enterprises had changed forever. Nathan sat behind his desk, staring out over the towering skyline of the city. The glass reflected the morning sun, painting golden streaks across the room. For the first time in years, the company he built felt foreign to him. He clasped his hands together, his jaw tightening as memories of the past 24 hours replayed in his mind. The mockery, the whispers, the blatant dismissal. He had removed the worst offenders, James, Madison, and the executives who had allowed elitism to thrive. But the culture they created, it had taken root long before them. He exhaled sharply. This wasn't just about a few individuals. This was about something bigger. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. Samantha stood at the entrance, hesitant. Nathan gave a small nod. "Come in." She stepped forward, clasping her hands. "Sir, I just wanted to say thank you for giving me this opportunity." Nathan studied her. There was still disbelief in her eyes, as if she couldn't quite accept that kindness had been rewarded. "You earned it," he said firmly. She hesitated. "Still, I know that people like me don't usually—" Nathan raised a hand. "That stops today." Samantha swallowed hard. This company should have always been a place where talent speaks louder than privilege. He leaned forward, voice unwavering. "But we let the wrong people define success. We let arrogance disguise itself as leadership. We let bias go unchecked." Samantha looked down, nodding. "I know change won't happen overnight." Nathan's lips pressed together. "No, it won't." His gaze drifted back to the window. For years, this company had thrived. But at what cost? How many brilliant minds had been ignored? How many people had been overlooked, dismissed, or pushed aside simply because they didn't look the part? He turned back to her. "We're not just making policy changes. We're redefining what leadership looks like." Samantha straightened. "What do you mean?" "From now on, promotions will be based on talent, character, not just who you know or what family you come from." His voice grew stronger. "This company will succeed because of its people, not in spite of them." Samantha let out a small breath as if she had been holding it for years. "That means a lot." Nathan's expression softened. "It should have meant a lot before now." She nodded once, then turned to leave. Just before stepping out, she paused. "Sir?" Nathan raised a brow. "You asked yesterday how we treat people in this company." He nodded. Samantha gave a small, determined smile. "I think we're about to find out." Nathan watched her leave, something settling deep in his chest. He straightened in his chair. This was just the beginning. The company had been shaken, but for the first time it stood on a foundation worth rebuilding. And he would make sure it was stronger than ever before. Nathan stepped out of his office and into the heart of Sterling Enterprises. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking at the company through reports and meetings. He was seeing it for what it truly was. A week ago, this place was built on appearances. Now the foundation was shifting. He walked down the main hallway. The silence that once accompanied his footsteps was gone. An entry-level employee nodded at him, not in fear, but in respect. Nathan returned the nod. Further ahead, Samantha stood near the break room, speaking with a group of analysts. This time, she wasn't an outsider. She was leading. She turned, meeting Nathan's gaze with a quiet confidence she hadn't shown before. She wasn't the only one who had changed. The atmosphere had shifted. Employees greeted each other, casual workers were acknowledged, and kindness was no longer the exception. It was the expectation. Nathan stopped by the front desk. Madison was no longer there. Instead, a new receptionist smiled warmly as she helped a young intern navigate the system. A week ago, a man in janitor's clothes would have been ignored at this desk. Now he would be helped without hesitation. Nathan moved past the meeting rooms, catching snippets of conversations. "We should loop in more departments before finalizing this. Let's bring in the interns on this one. I want fresh perspectives." "Hey, thanks for helping me out yesterday." Before, these words would have been rare. Now, they were the standard. Nathan reached the far end of the office where James had once ruled with arrogance. His old office was empty now. The space felt lighter without him. A young woman stepped inside, adjusting her chair, preparing for her first day as VP of Operations. She had earned it. Nathan exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest finally lifting. Change was happening, not through fear, but through understanding. He turned to leave. passing employees who once refused to meet his eyes. Some looked at him with guilt, others with admiration. They all understood now. Respect wasn't a privilege reserved for the powerful, it was a right. Nathan stepped into the elevator, taking one last look at the company he built. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just leading a company, he was leading a movement. Real change would take time. There was still work to be done. But Sterling Enterprises was no longer a company of exclusion. It was a company that stood for something greater. As the elevator doors closed, Nathan smiled. This was just the beginning.